Hello everyone. In this lesson we're going to learn how to reduce duplication in our Blade templates. Let's jump right into the action. So as we said at the end of our previous lesson, this is not a course about CSS or graphic design. So there really isn't any educational value within the context of this course for you and I to spend time writing CSS and building out the visual templates for our web application. So I've already created completely static HTML and CSS templates for you and I to use. So here's what I want you to do right now. Go ahead and visit this URL or this GitHub repo that I've set up. So you can type in this URL, or better yet, there will be a link to this exact URL in the resources for this Udemy lesson. But essentially, right now I want you to pause the video and visit this GitHub repo and then either clone or download it. So I would just recommend clicking this green code button right about here, and then click download zip. So as soon as I do that, I can then go into my computer's downloads folder. Here we see the file, it's named Laravel course main.zip. Just go ahead and extract that file. In the main new folder that it gives you, you can jump into that folder, and then we're just interested in this HTML templates folder. So if you want to move this somewhere so that it's easy to access, that's okay. I'm actually going to move it to my desktop just because we're going to reference this folder many times throughout this course. Right, as we're building our application and our different pages and routes and features, there's no sense spending a bunch of time writing HTML that looks pretty, right, and setting up the CSS, so on and so forth. So right now, if you want to, you could go ahead and look at the contents of this folder, HTML templates. And for example, you could drag, 404.html on top of your web browser. You can see that this lets you preview what the template should look like. So here's what I want our goal to be for this lesson. I want us to use the code in these files and just import it into Blade templates in our application. For this particular lesson, let's go ahead and set up the home page for a guest that hasn't registered an account yet. So that's going to look something like this, right? The homepage encourages them to sign up for an account, or they can log in. And then just so we can practice setting up more than one page, so we can practice reducing duplicate code, in the header and the shared footer, let's also set up post.html. So if you open that in your browser, you can see it should look like this, right? It's got the global header, it's got the global footer, and then it's just got this little bit of example, sample blog post area. So how do we get started? Well, here's what I would do. In that new folder that you just put on your desktop or wherever you placed it, the HTML templates folder, just go ahead and open up the file that's named home-guest.html. I want you to open this in a text editor, so either VS Code or whatever editor you use. I'm actually going to open it in Sublime Text just so you can tell that this is different from this, right? This is my Visual Studio Code window with our Laravel files. And this theme is obviously different. This is a different program. But I just want you to copy every single thing, everything in this file. So Control A or Command A to just select all of it. And then just copy that into your clipboard. Okay? And then in VS Code, I want you to go into Resources and then Views. And then go ahead and jump into homepage.blade.php. In this file, you can get rid of everything. So just Control A, delete, so a completely empty slate, and just paste in your clipboard. Go ahead and hit save. And now make sure that your server is running so we can preview that in the web browser. So in the command line, it's just php artisan serve. Now we are going to be missing the CSS file. We haven't set that up yet. So as soon as you refresh, you should see something that looks like this. You can see a little bit of the styling in the, the top red custom color. Those features are missing. So let's go ahead and get our CSS file set up. Here's what I want you to do. In that HTML templates folder that we just downloaded, you'll see that in addition to HTML files, there's a file named main.css. Here's what I want you to do with this main.css file. You can right click on it and choose copy. On Windows, with it selected, you can press Control-C. On Mac, you could select it and press Command-C. But then I want you to go into our Laravel project. So remember, it's named Our Main App. And then I want you to go into the public folder and then just paste in the CSS file. Cool. So now let's go point towards that. So in our Blade file, right, homepage.blade.php, I want you to look on line number 13. So that's where we're importing a style sheet. And for the href value, just change this so that it begins with a / like this, right? So / main.css. That way it always looks at the root of our domain. So if you go ahead and save that and then refresh, perfect. Now we see, the custom fonts being used, the custom color up in the header, so on and so forth. Perfect. Now I should have mentioned that anything you place in the public folder can be easily accessed, from your domain. So we placed our CSS file, so that means that, you could visit at the end of your domain / main.css. So if you want to place simple files there like a favicon or a favicon for your website or a CSS file, so on and so forth, this does work. Having said that, I do want to let you know that Laravel has a beautiful built-in system for asset management. Assets like CSS and JavaScript files. So what we just did for loading this CSS file, this works, but don't worry, later in the course, we will learn about Laravel's asset management tool so that we can write JavaScript code, custom CSS, and Laravel can help us bundle up those files, and then Laravel also has a special way of loading those files. So we wouldn't maybe necessarily actually write out a line like this, link, rel, href, but for now, this simple approach works. Cool. So we've got our homepage. Now, what I really want to practice for the rest of this lesson is reducing duplication. So for example, the header is going to be the same on every page. This little footer area is going to be the same on every page. So in order to learn how to reduce duplication in Laravel templates, let's first have multiple pages. So in other words, we've already set up, /about. So why don't we just use this single blog post template for when you visit the About URL? Let me show you what I have in mind. So in our Laravel project folder, I just want you to go into the resources folder and then views, and then on the views folder, we can right click and create a new file. And I want you to name it single-post.blade.php. So there you can see it, singlepost.blade.php. In this file, I want you to go back into the HTML templates that we downloaded, and I just want you to open up post.html for a single blog post. Open this file up in your text editor. So here it is in Sublime Text. I just want to borrow this entire file. So select everything, Control A or Command A, copy that into your clipboard. In our brand new file, you can just paste that in. Up at the very top for main.css, you can just place a / right there. We can go ahead and save this file. And now let's just go into our example controller and tell the about method that it should use that new view file. So to do that, you would just go into your app folder and then HTTP, controllers, and then example controller. Or I want to show you a faster way. If you have VS Code, you can just press Command P or on Windows Control P, and then you can just start typing for the file name. So for example, if you start typing example for example controller, it should be one of the first suggestions. You can just push enter. Cool, you've opened that file. So you would just find the method that we named about page, get rid of this return line with a hard-coded string of text, and just replace it by instead saying return and then call the view function, semicolon, and the name of the file is single-post. That's it. We can just go ahead and hit save. If we refresh the /about URL, awesome. Now, we can get to the real task at hand, right? The whole point of this video is we now have duplicate code for this header and for this footer in our two different templates, right? Because they're going to be identical for this screen and, if I go back, for this screen. So I want to show you two of the most common approaches in Blade to reduce duplication like this. The first approach will use something called an include. And if you've ever worked with WordPress templates or if you've ever built your own PHP sites without a framework, this is probably the strategy that you're familiar with. So let's work through this. In our views folder, right? So in resources in the views folder, you could right click on views and click new file and create a file named header.blade.php. Okay? And then in this file, you would just include all of the code for this header bar. So do this with me. Let's go into homepage.blade.php, and I want you to begin selecting from the very first line and then just scroll down all the way to line number 34 where it says header ends here. So only select those 34 lines of code and I want you to cut them into your clipboard. So remove them from this file. We have them in our clipboard, and then go into header.blade.php and paste that in. So we can save that. And then back in the homepage file, if you save right now, obviously all of that code is missing. But now watch how easy it is to pull it in. So at the very top here, we can just say @ symbol for a directive, and then say include parentheses, and then single quotes. We named it header. We don't need the .blade.php extension, just the initial part of the file name. So header, if we save that and refresh, cool, we've got the header back. So now you could do the same thing in our other template, right? So in our single post.blade.php, you could go ahead and delete from line number 1 all the way to line number 30, right? We don't need any of that top header. Now, when you delete that, and then if you visit /about, obviously it's missing the header, but then you would just add it back in by saying @ symbol include parentheses quotes header. You could go ahead and hit save, refresh, awesome. Now you could do that exact same thing with the footer, right? Just split it into a separate file called footer.blade.php and then include it. I don't need to walk you through that. The idea is that that's one tool in your toolbox, right? Using an include like that. However, right now I want to show you a totally different tool that I prefer to use. So there's something in Blade called a component. Watch how cool this is. Inside our views folder, I want you to do this with me. We're going to create a new subfolder, and the name of it matters. So I want you to right click on the views folder, click new folder, and it needs to be named lowercase components. Okay? In this new components folder, I want you to right click, create a new file, and you could name it anything, but let's name it layout.blade.php. Now, in this layout file, check this out. We can have our header and our footer, and then just have sort of a hollowed out middle slot where the unique content for each page can go. Check this out. If that doesn't make sense, I think it'll make sense in about 40 seconds from now. So in our layout component, let's start with the header. So go into header.blade.php, just select everything in this file, copy it into your clipboard, and then go into layout. Go ahead and paste it in. Okay, and now below that, I want you to say double curly brackets and then $slot, just like this. Now below that, let's just include the global footer code. So in your other editor where we opened up our HTML templates that we're borrowing code from, if you scroll down to the very bottom, you'll see a comment that says footer begins. So just select from that comment that says footer begins all the way down to the very, very bottom. Select all that, copy that into your clipboard, and then in our layout blade file, just paste that in below our slot here. So right about here. Cool. So I think you can see what's happening now. This layout file can work for every page on our web application. The only difference is the unique content that would go in the slot here, right? In between the header and footer. So this is our layout component. So you can go ahead and save it. And now let me show you how to use it or leverage it. Let's set up our home page first. So go into homepage.blade.php. You can get rid of the include header at the top here, right? You can use includes if you want to, but we're not going to right now in the course. I want to use a component. So here's how you leverage or use a component. You start an HTML opening tag, or one that looks like an HTML opening tag, but you say lowercase x dash, and then whatever you named your component file. So we named ours layout, right? So you would just say layout, and then close your HTML-like looking tag. So on a new line, you could say close it, right? So /x matching layout. Now in between these two, whatever you include here, that's what will go in the slot that we set up, sort of the empty hollowed out middle. So here's what you can do. At the bottom of homepage.blade, just delete the footer, right? We don't need the footer. So you could delete from the very, very bottom all the way to where it says footer begins. We do not need that. So now all that's left down here is the content that would go in the middle, in the slot. So I would just move all of this to live inside right here. So I would just take this, scroll down to the very bottom, copy that or cut it into your clipboard, and then in between this X layout sandwich like this, you just paste it in. Go ahead and hit save, and now if we visit our home page, so just the root of our domain, awesome. We've got our header, we've got our unique content, we've got our footer. Let's go do the same thing for our /about URL. So here's what we would do. Go into single-post.blade.php. We don't need the include header at the top. Instead, we want a sandwich where it's, an opening HTML tag with lowercase x, dash, whatever you named your component. So we named ours layout. And then just have a matching closing tag. In between there, you would just have your unique content that should go in the slot. So again, we don't need the footer code at the very bottom here. I would delete from the very bottom up to this comment that says footer begins. But then I would take all of this remaining HTML and just move it to live inside this sandwich right here. So paste that in, hit save. You can refresh. Awesome. So we have effectively removed all of the duplicate code for the header and footer. And now all of the different templates and pages on our site, they only need to spell out the content that's actually unique for that URL. This is awesome. And before we close out this lesson, let's go ahead and delete our file named headerblade.php, right? We're not using the include strategy, so we actually don't need this file named headerblade.php. I'm going to delete it right now. Also, we no longer need this welcome.blade.php, so I'm going to delete that. That was just the starter file that Laravel created for us. We definitely don't need it, so I'm going to delete welcome.blade. Perfect. Now, where do we go from here? Well, before we talk about what we're going to do in the next lesson, I want to ease some of your potential confusion. So you might have noticed that we're still using our file called example controller. Don't worry. In the future, we will have separate controllers for separate features on our website. In other words, we'll have one controller named user controller. We'll have another controller named, blog post controller. And then it's a social media website, right? So one user can follow another user. So as you might have guessed, we'll have a controller called follow controller. So eventually we will have separate controllers to keep our functionality organized. But for now, we just have the one example controller. Don't worry, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. Cool. Now, having said that, what are we going to do in our very next lesson? Well, at this point, we are ready to let a user visit the homepage and sign up for a user account. However, if we're going to let a user sign up for an account, we would need to permanently remember, their username, email address, their hashed password value, so on and so forth. And then we're going to let them create blog posts. We would need a way to permanently store their blog post that they create. In other words, we need a database to accomplish those things. To put it simply, in order to do a lot of the actually interesting, useful things with a web application, you need a database for permanent dynamic storage. And in our very next lesson, we're going to get started with that. So there will be one video for Windows users where we learn how to install something called MySQL onto your computer. There will be a video just for Mac users where we get MySQL installed. But then after that, once we all have it installed, we'll group back up and learn how to connect our Laravel application to our MySQL database. This is where things get truly, truly powerful. I'm so excited to set this up with you. Let's keep our momentum rolling, and I will see you in the next lesson.